Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, and news. If it impacts you as a resident, we discuss it. We give you 3 short stories, 1 big stories, and then our wins and losses every week. And how goes it?
It goes very well. I'm in a great mood because my oldest child is in town visiting. He came into town for a tournament over in Dallas. He's playing Magic the Gathering. And he didn't do as well as he would have liked, which is sad for him, but glad for me, because that means the rest of the time that he has here, he has a little more time to spend with his mom.
Yeah. No, and you know what? I feel like my brother-in-law is a big Magic person. So now I feel like he needs to... that he obsessed with it, so that's cool to see.
Michael played collegiate level in college his freshman year. Traveled up and down the state of California with a team from UC Davis and played against other UC teams. But then it ended up taking up a whole bunch of his time, and so he kind of scaled back on it. Yeah. But he still does it in his personal time. Yeah,
that community is cool and crazy awesome. I like supporting my brother-in-law when he participates.
I absolutely think that it is cool and crazy awesome because my son plays it, and he has a lot of great friends. They all came home last night to the house, a bunch of his friends from high school. Yeah. There were like 5 of them in the living room yesterday playing some. I think they may have been continuing to play Magic the Gathering. I don't know. They had a bunch of cards on the dining room table. So
well, the 817 podcast is a Magic gathering of change makers of Fort Worth, and we had you like that? We had Veto. What you think? I mean, man, Veto was great.
I know. Everybody I talked to was like, wow, you had Beto. How did you pull that off? And I'm like, well, I mean, I met him a few times, and EJ ran into him at a book signing, and we just asked him. So you know, we're cool like that, right?
Exactly. I mean, we've had a lot of people, and I know we need to get probably some other people on as we talk about other things. But we're glad that for a little bit, it's just going to be me and you running through some stories.
Yep,
we got election results.
Regular format.
We got election results, and man, was voting turnout very, very small. About 35,350 people voted. That's 5.28% of registered voters cast their ballots May 28th primary runoff election. We also, though, had a lot of storms. It was after Memorial Day. What is your kind of take on just kind of the end result, but then also just kind of the low turnout?
Yeah, I think that I didn't vote until Election Day, and those
Did you have to get a canoe and get there, or
no,
were you able to make it?
It was. I actually did walk, though, but I was wearing a rain jacket. I walked to work out because I forgot that my workout had been canceled, and then I walked from where my workout is over to McLean 6th grade, which is where my voting place is, and it's like 2 blocks from my house, so it's super convenient. I love it, and it's a great old building. But it was slow, and everybody I posted about voting and with my I voted sticker and a picture outside the polling place and said, try not to be discouraged. That was my post because I knew that the weather was going to be a problem. There were a lot of people without power, I think, from the storms the night before. Dallas extended the voting. Dallas County extended their voting by 2 hours because of the delays and the power outages and all of that. So, I knew it was going to be low. Just all the voting that we've had, the election earlier in May where people didn't even know there was an election. I ran into a neighbor on my way home from voting, and he was like, oh, I didn't know there were any runoffs on the Democratic side. Yeah. So he wasn't planning to go because he didn't know there were any runoffs on that side. And there were. Yeah. So I tried to inform him quickly, and he made a comment about how he would rather just not vote if he's not informed. And I'm like, well, you have time. It's still early in the morning. Be informed. Here are some resources.
Yeah, and so let's go ahead and go through those. So we had Craig Goldman, winner for Kay Granger's seat. He did pretty good there with getting 2 of 3 votes, so he really did his thing. I think.
Well, he still has to run in November against the Democrat,
which is the young successful Tyler Hunt kid.
Yep.
Which
Trey Hunt,
which I would love to have on the pod, just because I'm just curious about his journey. And then we also had Republican nomination for Texas House District 97. John McQueenie takes a narrow lead over Cheryl Bean in House District 97 race. Democratic nomination of Texas House District 97. Carlos Walker wins Democratic nomination in Texas House District 97 and will now go against John McQueenie in November. Republican nomination for Texas House District 91. David Lowe beats incumbent Stephanie Click in race for House District 91. Tarrant County Precinct 1 Commissioner Roderick Mile emerges victory in runoff for Democratic Tarrant County Precinct with over 60% of those votes. And so really showed out and delivered on his campaign. Any thoughts, comments of how it turned out, or do you feel?
I was a little surprised. I think there was a lot of stories in the news about the race between McQueenie and Bean, and there was a lot in the news about O'Shea and Goldman, and so there were folks that were expressing, opinions about which of those races they wanted, or which of those candidates they wanted to win, and it was close. That McQueenie Bean race, I went to bed not knowing who was the winner of that one. So I think that it's just interesting to see with low voter turnout how few people can swing an election.
Yeah, and it's Goldman did his thing to get enough spacing, but I think that's less that Goldman did a great campaign and more that the person who was running against him wasn't a strong candidate. Like, if someone
wasn't a strong candidate and also ran a really negative campaign.
Yeah.
And maybe not just him, but the people who were backing him, because that was all of those red signs that were put up all over town saying ridiculous things that if you dug into the details of them at all were just nonsense.
Yeah. And so, I imagine if there was more like a Tim O'Hare competitor to Goldman, what would have happened? So I don't give the nod to our moderate conservative plank, I guess, for saving their establishment. Because what we're going to get to in the big story is about vouchers and how Governor Abbott has got a lot of seats in his House that allows him to pass vouchers. And that's going to be our big story. So I think at the end of the day, giving you the results, Governor Abbott has more seats, and ultimately North Texas has gotten more to the right, even though people like Goldman won. So let's go ahead and move into short story number 2. Short story number 2, we're going to talk about housing. An estimated of 26% of Fort Worth single-family homes are owned by companies, city says. This is a Star Telegram report by my man Harrison Mantis. He did a nice, solid story. And you brought this to our to the center of our conversation. We talk about this a lot, but now there's stories written about it. We could have maybe even aspired Harrison to maybe explore and talk about this because I know he's a listener. So
maybe we can take credit for these things. I know across the country we've been talking a lot, or the articles and different people have been talking a lot about houses being owned by companies and the percentages. And I think in some places they're saying it's like 50-50. Yeah. The sales over a certain period of time have been companies buying up housing stock. But it's interesting. The city of Fort Worth does keep a lot of data. And in this case, they looked at the tax exemption, homeowner tax exemption, and address of person owning a home and whether they live in that home or not, to determine that 26% of the homes in Fort Worth are owned by somebody other than the resident that lives in that home. And I think that this is causing a lot of, or lending itself to a lot of the crisis of home ownership and the ability for people to purchase first-time homes, especially. So I found this to be very interesting, and I think it's good that the city kind of tracks this kind of data in order to have some details and information that then can inform, hopefully, policies and programs that could combat this in the future and allow people to have more access to affordable housing.
I also think the expansion, I also sent you kind of that article around. So one, you have businesses investing in the homes, but then you have people holding on to their homes. So kind of like this next article we have here is an economist article saying baby boomers are loaded. Why are they so stingy? Now, the whole story gives a lot of context of cash and how much cash baby boomers have. But the real part of this data point that came out on May 26th was that 26% of homes with 3 or more rooms are owned by people who have an empty nest. And so not only do you have people staying in their larger homes, but you also then have the ownership thing that this Star Telegram article discuss. So like that housing structure and finding houses in traditional older places is just difficult if people use these homes like in my neighborhood as rental homes, or if there's older people who are staying in larger homes. And so like there's a housing crunch. And then not to mention, I feel like Harrison's article missed on how much of new homes being built are by owners or by businesses that are doing more than, that are doing these large suburban plots of land and then building 250 homes.
And some of those are built to rent.
Yeah.
I mean, they're
Which is-
single family
yeah.
detached houses, but it's a build
Yeah.
to rent model, not the
And that's
to
insane.
sell.
So it's a lot of, it's
Well, I
just
found
challenge.
The baby boomer article was interesting to me because my husband falls into the very, very end of being a baby boomer. He was born in 63 and it ends at 64. So I guess that makes us, not me quite, because I'm a little younger. But it was interesting to see the whole concept about how people are spending money or not spending money. That it talks about normally people in their younger years are spending more than they're making because they're having to borrow money to buy a house or borrow money for school. And then in the middle years, they're saving more money. And then what has traditionally been in the past is that in their later years, they spend more money than they earn because they're retired. So they're no longer earning money, but they spend down their retirement and their savings in order to carry themselves through the rest of their lives. But that they're not doing that anymore. They're like sitting on a pile of cash like a dragon and not spending that money, which takes that money out of the economy.
Yeah.
And then that money is not being circulated in the economy and they're sitting on valuable assets. So for like us, we are those baby boomers who live in a house that has three extra bedrooms. So we're an empty nest with 4 bedrooms total and only using one, but our house is paid for. So we don't have any, it doesn't behoove us to sell our house and buy something smaller when, and it's just as we would put all that money back into another thing. And it allows us to have rooms for when people come to visit, like this weekend with my son being home. So,
And it was 28% of American homes with 3 or more. I think I said 26, according to Redfin Property Firm. I mean, to me, this is my overall bet on society. So when I'm living in the East Side and my house is paid for, and I'm, is that the kicker with this boomer class is like they're saying the average boomer is, has $1.3 million or at least over $1 million based off this article. So when you look at 83 million people have 17% of the world's GDP in their bank, and what that's happening is it looks like because the storyline is that people are also passionately motivated to pass down to the next generation. So then what's going to happen is like this lump of wealth is just going to continue to exacerbate the inequities of where you're
people
born.
who don't
Yeah,
have
exactly.
the ability to sit
So
on
it's
the
like-
money and pass
exactly.
it down to their...
Yeah. So it's like, so then what happens is these houses, it's going to be interesting, then gets just passed down to the family. So, and that could be their second home, that could be their bigger home, maybe that's their first home. And now you're just kind of having like this generational pass off. And you already see a lot of millennials today and a lot of Gen Zers. They say that the top 10% of millennials are actually doing better than the top 10% of boomers at the same time. But when you look at the average millennial, they're doing worse. But that top 10 millennial, it shows how much money that they got from parents or support on the house buy. That leap is just going to be the way that I feel like millennials and Gen Z actually retains any type of wealth, is this passed down from their parents who did hold everything. Yeah. And so that's so a couple ideas that I had around it is like there can be programs around if 28% of homes with 3 or more rooms is owned by an empty nest, that means now I have 2 rooms. And let's just say one of them, creating some type of act, some type of policy that allows the government to fund and support people in this situation, but then maybe this college kid or maybe these newcomers or maybe people who are looking for a place, to create subsidies to allow you to now create affordable housing in a way that allows us to pay old people to get additional funding, but then also deal with the crisis. I think there's this like crazy cool opportunity, especially for people who might need more funding to do that. I mean, I don't know.
I look in my neighborhood at houses that were designed in a way that during the war,
Yeah.
a bedroom had a door to the outside. And so if a woman was living in a home, her husband was off at war, she could rent that room out more easily. And I think our house is not set up like
Yeah.
that. And so it would be pretty intrusive
Yeah,
to
yeah.
have somebody else living in our home, renting out rooms or whatever. But the idea of being able to have, an ADU, we've
Yeah.
talked about that in the past, that could be a possibility.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting to look at that and try to
And
figure
just
out.
like I think it'd be exciting because like the number one kicker to wealth creation is economic connectedness, and that is nothing else shows a better indicator of getting a person out of poverty, out of wealth, than the relationships they have with rich people. And so it's like our current status of how we do things doesn't bring us together. This is a way where maybe you're bringing it together, different generations, different ages, different diversity. I don't know. There's a creative way again down the way when this is more. I don't think today's average American would want to do something like this, but I think as we get more progressive, more like down the way, I think an act like this that stimulated it back in World War II can happen here for us as we need housing for more people.
Well, and I think what you just touched on, how we set up housing and how housing is provided leads us into another article from the Star-Telegram entitled, "As Fort Worth Redevelops Its Older Public Housing Complex, Residents Look Back Fondly." Because that is basically touching on the idea that in the past, we put affordable housing all together in one place. And so you had these concentrations of poverty. And so the policy was to change that because that had led to some negative outcomes. And so they want to change that and disperse affordable housing across the city and not have it all concentrated in one place. But in this article, they touch a lot on folks coming back to Butler Place in this instance, which is a public housing complex. And they have some really positive memories about the communities that were existing in these areas where they grew up. And they do touch on the negative aspects as well. But it definitely, when you're looking at it from a city planning perspective of the trying to combat the negatives of these concentrations of poverty, remembering that you're also disrupting a community that has been built up over time. And in some of these instances, great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, and kids, 4 generations all lived in this community. So I thought that was just a really interesting article that touched on some aspects of the changes that are being proposed with getting rid of these concentrations of public housing and moving forward, and what that looks like.
Yeah, no, I thought the photos were great too, and just to looking at the history is awesome. You also we're talking really around like how do you keep community. How do we deal with the housing crisis? Another story you brought up, but I don't know how much you want to hit on it, is that you ended up seeing a house was printed.
Yeah, there was an article
and
about
Harrison Mantis did this one as well.
In the Star-Telegram as well. First of its kind house is being printed in Fort Worth neighborhood, cost $150,000. So they're doing a process in District 11. It's in Jeanette Martinez's district, who I sat next to at a breakfast and asked her about this because I found the article to be interesting when it stated that they were not planning to build any more and they weren't planning to sell this one. So I was like, what is the point of doing this? But she indicated that the owners of La Grande Plaza are printing this 3-bedroom single-family home on Bolt Street, which is right adjacent to La Grande Plaza, and that they are it's going to be used for kind of a guest house for people coming in and out doing business, I think, with the folks at La Grande Plaza. So I think it still could be a model of something that can be done to build housing in the future. I think it's interesting that they were able to figure out a way to get through the permitting process at the city of Fort Worth to bring on a new housing type that probably is not totally covered in all of those processes, but it meets all the codes and all of that. So I just think it's interesting to be open to the idea of delivering housing in a variety of ways. It does harken back to times in the past where people have wanted to build a more affordable construction product, like a manufactured home where components of it are built somewhere else, brought in and assembled on a lot. And in the past, in Texas specifically, from my experience of being a city planner, there's been resistance to that because neighborhoods will say, well, we don't want that here. It's not as high quality. Yeah. In Texas, very much people think if it's not masonry, 100% brick, that it's not a quality home. And so you'll get people not wanting that type of a product. But I know that there is a manufactured house in Ryan Place that for most people driving by, they wouldn't even know that it was a manufactured home. So I think that these cost-saving measures are important to take into consideration and not just be, a hard dig in your heels, say no to everything that might be a new and different way of doing something.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I'm really excited as a young homeowner, right? Someone who's like just started the home owning process. I get really nervous on not necessarily, I don't get nervous on a sense of where those value of homes happen. I guess for me, it's just like, I also see like population is supposed to be decreasing. So if population is decreasing, how is value of the homes going to continue to go up if population is to go down? So like I'm always really interested on like now, especially if now houses are going to be able to do this, which is a good thing. $150K to the 3D print a home. That's really awesome. So it's like, what is the dynamic of the value of homes 30, 40 years from now? If now you can 3D print them like no one's business and there's less people. So
like you wouldn't be in the same position that I'm in now, where I bought a house in the early
correct.
90s and the value has gone through the roof.
Correct.
So you worry about that asset not being available to be sold for your retirement the way people today have been able to do.
And
that.
I also think that and I look at it as it won't be an asset in the way of retirement. It would be an asset in the way of I'm living somewhere that I can afford to live because I bought it when it was cheap. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people in their homes. It's like, I can't ever sell this house because I won't be able to live anywhere else at the niceness that I live right now. That I bought this house for $500 a month. And now it's like, now I can't leave. Where am I going to go live for $500 a month? So that's my battle. It's like, I'm afraid to ever leave where I live because I will have to spend 3x to live there, So it's an interesting dynamic, but I'm glad that Harrison is doing stories around this.
And I think that's part of the reason why people resist any kind of change in their neighborhoods. They think that they bought that neighborhood the way it is. It's availed them to have this quality of life, this level of life, this way that their neighborhood flows and exists. And there's no guarantee that if you allowed some kind of change to occur that you would continue to have that. So I think that might lend itself, this was just something that kind of dawned on me as you were speaking, to that whole idea of wanting to dip neighborhoods in amber and never have them change. But I think that we need to be open to having conversations about how things change and maybe experiment with a little change. But I understand the concerns that people have when that's like the biggest investment in their life.
Yeah, most Americans' wealth comes from their house.
Yeah.
Which I also think it's a weird dynamic because like, you could say my house is worth this much, but it doesn't matter until you leave living there. So it's like,
in Texas, your property taxes keep going up based on that value of that house going up, and so that makes it a bigger struggle for folks to stay in that house.
Yeah, and then so it's
you can't leave, you can't stay.
Yeah, but good short story number 2. Now short story number 3, we're going to give an update on the Tarrant County Jail situation. A lot has kind of unfolded. One being that another inmate dies. This is the 3rd inmate in 5 weeks. This inmate died last Monday, according to Tarrant Medical Examiner's Office. No cause of manner of death has been determined. An autopsy is pending. Chastity Corday Bonner, 35 of North Richland Hills, was pronounced dead just after noon Monday at John Peter Smith Hospital in Fort Worth. The Tarrant County Sheriff Office said in a news release Tuesday afternoon that Bonner was found unresponsive in her cell around 11 a.m. Monday, JPS staff in the jail were called and attempted life-saving measures. They also administered 2 doses of Narcan, according to the Sheriff's Office. They're positioning this as this was like a fentanyl or like a lack of being off of something. And so based off this story, I'm not saying that's true because obviously they also said Anthony Johnson was pepper spray. So at the end of the day, who knows what's really happening at this moment. But I think the real part of this story is that another person has died in our jail, 3 in 5 weeks. Serious part there. On top of that, a continued part of the story is the Tarrant Chief Deputy over jails is retiring. People are saying that Charles Eckert, who has been with the Sheriff's Office for 32 years, is retiring. the reason why this is important is that Elisa Simmons, commissioner, said kind of in a release on Wednesday that, hey, her understanding that he was leaving as a part of the consequences, and this was a move by the sheriff showcasing that he is changing leadership. But what made this story awkward is that the Tarrant chief deputy is saying that his retirement has nothing to do with people wanting change at leadership and being a consequences. As he quote unquote said, this is a great agency, and he's just retiring because he's at a good place. So,
I mean, time-wise, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
And maybe he wants to retire at this time because things are not, I mean, he says it's a great organization and such. So I don't know.
But that just shows the politics too. It's like, I think, yeah, it just shows that like he is supporting his department. And yeah, I think you're right. Like the answer is like, it looks like this wasn't because of what's happening. And still to today, unfortunately, Bill Waybourne doesn't see what's going on in his jails as something needs to change. And there needs to be consequences on what happened to Anthony Johnson and other people. And for them to just timely do this, because I feel like if he was trying to get benefits from this, Sheriff Waybourne, he would have said, oh, look, we're making changes, but Waybourne stayed quiet. So it wasn't a move of,
So
I'm
it's
trying
just
to.
left up to people to speculate.
Yeah. And
Which
then,
is unfortunate for the man that just retired, because that's not a fun way to leave.
Yeah. And then Commissioner Simmons, talked about on her interview how she gets very little insight of what's going on and how hard it is to understand, and also very, very busy. To then see that nugget that this person is leaving, she could assume like, oh, that makes sense because someone should leave from all the craziness that's happening in our jails.
And I keep asking questions and nobody's coming down here to tell me what is happening. And that goes back to the comments that Bud Kennedy made about the county and everybody, being at the same level and nobody's anybody's boss. And so she can't force them to come and explain things to her.
And so she then assumes like, oh, finally the sheriff is listening to the people and is letting this person leave gracefully, but is, leaving because we need to make some changes. And now to be like seen in a news story saying, psych, this was just a retirement and we all still think our jails are great. And that to me is like the loss of this. It's like the story is written as if Mr. Eckert is saying, no, this place is great and I'm only retiring because it's 32 years. There's just a lot of like, it just shows you the lack of the Tarrant jail leadership doesn't hear the community or doesn't even care what the community feels. Because if you look at the community, your report card would be an F, but yet you think you're doing F as in fantastic. And so just to shows the lack of ignorance or care about what the community is saying. And Elisa Simmons is like, no, the community is saying change needs to happen. So we assume this change because you guys also believe change needs to happen. And it's like, nope, there's a splintering here where, nope, this is just them leaving because they're leaving.
Yeah, and we base most of our conversations about these things on stories in the news. Yeah. And I have seen a trend of more reporters having to say no response was received in time for this article. Yeah. And I think that's problematic too, because the rest of us are sitting out here waiting to hear things. And we don't have the ability to go to every public meeting and hear reports. But in this case, often those reports are not happening. Yeah. So we rely on the news to know. And if nobody's responding to the news inquiry, then we're left wondering.
So those are just updates because obviously the Tarrant situation has been an ongoing situation for all of us and another death in our jails. And so if this is a time to get active and aware of our Tarrant County news. I've reached out to Patrick Moses as well to come onto the pod, who is running for sheriff against Waybourne. So we'll see if we can get him onto the pod as well. All right, so the big story for us today is going to be education. One, because me and Ann got really into the conversation around middle schools, and now the data is showing, the news cycle is showing that Fort Worth ISD pulls plans to close middle schools and moves forward with campus renovations. So we're going to discuss that piece, but on top of this, we're going to get to the grander piece because we also just completed an election cycle for primaries, and so we're going to talk about also the situation with why our public schools are where they are today. They haven't had increased funding or support since 2019. And Abbott is holding, that surplus of money and not making any action, and he's holding public education hostage because of his voucher program. And so there's a lot to talk about, where we're going to first start with the micro and talk about what is going on locally in Fort Worth, but then long-term looking out what's the future of public school in Texas.
So we had a couple of articles, one by the Fort Worth Report and one by the Star-Telegram, that reported back that Fort Worth ISD School Board avoids school closures after weighing consolidation plan. Neighborhood identity, learning environments, commute times at 7 middle school campuses in Fort Worth Independent School District will remain in place after community members pled with the district officials against consolidating the campuses into 3 larger schools. The Board of Trustees pulled the agenda item on Tuesday from the school closure and consolidation in the Pascal, Northside, and Polytechnic school pyramids after several parents and community members voiced concern about the negative domino effects that could come from shutting down certain schools throughout Fort Worth. So that was reported on both by the Star-Telegram and the Fort Worth Report. The Fort Worth Report article is Fort Worth ISD pulls plans to close middle schools, moving forward with campus renovations. And I think we did touch on this on a previous pod. You and I got into a little bit of a disagreement, maybe a little bit about like whether larger schools and smaller campuses and student outcomes, and whether the consolidation plan was kind of based on just budgetary constraints or whether school outcomes were being taken into consideration. And then in addition to both of those articles, there's also an article or an opinion piece from the Star-Telegram that Fort Worth ISD board caved on closing middle schools, and they think that it is a bad sign for the district, according to the editorial report. There is no question that there are budgetary constraints that are causing decisions to have to be made. And I think that it is important that these conversations are had. The opinion piece did point out that this whole consolidation plan was kind of poorly rolled out, basically in its presentation to the community. And I think very much put parents in a position of feeling like they had to go down there and fight. And that's something I'm always trying to avoid. But I think that is kind of what governmental entities tend to do. They just put us in these positions where we have to take a side and then go and battle against each other. But I think that the editorial kind of contradicts itself, because it doesn't even mention the state funding piece that you mentioned in the start, the introduction to this topic, the fact that the state has a surplus, and that funding and enrollment problems are not unique to Fort Worth. This is something that is statewide. I've kind of wondered out loud about the growth of the city of Fort Worth and why enrollment is declining when the population is growing. But I don't wonder too hard about that, because I believe in my 34 years of living in Fort Worth, there has been a lot of folks that basically, when asked the question about what is the school situation when you are moving to Fort Worth, they have in the past basically pointed to private schools and said, we have good choices for private schools here. And now that with charter schools being introduced to the mix, I have friends that are in education who have concerns about whether the district is doing enough to promote the programs that they have and encourage people to stay in public school. Charter schools show up at some of those recruitment events and have fancy tables with balloons and all the bells and whistles and look shiny and new. And, admin maybe hasn't supported the schools of choice to roll that stuff out. And I have opinions about, urban patterns and how things are designed and how neighborhoods work and how communities work and all of that. And so I think all of that is just complicates this issue.
Yeah. And for me, it's like my goal with this pod is for myself is to figure out what's an honest narrative. And I think my ultimate North Star is always what's best for we instead of me. And the situation with schools is that both have benefits. Having smaller schools have benefits, having big schools have benefits. And it's just who are we trying to grow up into and become and compete in society. And I guess for me, I think it's great that we get to keep the culture of our middle schools, our beautiful middle schools. I live by Meadowbrook Elementary, and man, what a beautiful school. All these schools are beautiful. And so that's great. there's also, though, like, to me, like Wallace Bridges, when he was talking, it was like a lot of like, we're making decisions based off of parents' response, and then whatever our people who vote us in, we then make that decision. That's not necessarily means that that's the right decision. It's just a popular decision. And if I want to keep my seat in election, I need to make sure that I do what the popular vote is. And so doing anything hard, regardless if it's schools, anything, is a sacrifice to self. You might not have your seat again. And all public schools all across the country are having to make hard decisions because of the enrollment situation. And so that's, at the end of the day, I feel like we're keeping them open, not by logic or science, and we got new data. It's just that a bunch of people came and yelled at our people, and our people didn't want to make a move. However, I also agree that they didn't plan enough for this. But let me just talk about some of the benefits that could have came from bigger schools. I'm not saying that again, everything has a positive and a negative, in my opinion, especially on this topic. It's just what's better for the we. And so for me, I think what public schools do a poor job of understanding is business, and that they, in the sense of customer, is the family. And a family, if you want more people to come to your schools, you have to market to them. And if you're not marketing to them, then they don't believe in your school district. And so all these people are moving out of schools and the bigger schools in the suburbs because they believe in what those offer. And so, like, this whole idea, like, oh, bigger schools are bad for people. I'm like, Plano ISD has 3 to 4 high schools with over 3,500 kids in them. Allen High School has 1,500 kids per graduating class. Rich places have shown that big schools could work but we don't want to do it when it comes to our area. So this idea that big schools can't work, actually our highest performing communities and our wealthiest communities actually have big schools. So that's the part that, one, I think it's like we can't not say. Number 2 is that, like, what big school comes with a chance to compete with these suburbs, right? Our Fort Worth ISD kids in sports are getting beat by 30 to 40 points by the schools that have more kids at their school. Now, I'm not saying sports should be the reason why we do anything. I think sports is over-glorified in Texas. But because it is something that people are proud of in Texas, no one wants their kid to keep getting beat by the suburban school. And so then also imagine if you would have had these 7 middle schools in one school, the talent of our teams to then compete and to be actually good at sports again as a urban city, which is currently not good at sports. That's why people go to Duncanville, Lancaster. They go out of the burbs to send their kids to schools where they can compete and actually be successful at sports. So there's another issue of that. Now you're spreading principals. You could have had 5 high-quality people being principals in one school, and now they're going to have to go find some other people to hopefully want to be principals, hopefully want to do that. And so there's just a lot of value into, like, bringing that together. Community, bringing communities from different middle schools into one place to now finally talk to people outside of our neighborhoods. So that economic connectedness would have been there as well. Those are just some of the positives of big schools, but then obviously the negatives. How do you fit big schools in historic neighborhoods? How do you do transportation, which I don't think they had a good clarity on how they were going to do. And then, right, more kids, harder to manage, more density. Those things also become an issue. Bigger classrooms for teachers. These are all real conversations to have. But so I also was worried about the bond, right? In the sense of we have this bond that only passed by a few votes. So what are we going to do when we have to do another bond? And what if we don't pass votes? Now, if we're going to start shrinking, you're not going to get a new fancy mega school. They're just going to send our kids to one of these schools that are not ready for it. So if we're going to hold for smaller middle schools, we got to activate and really get more engaged with our local politics so that we can fund this vision that we want for these smaller schools. Because like you said, there's money in the state, but we have to step up and really advocate, because this could bite us in the butt 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah, I think that there definitely are budgetary constraints that they're working around that have to be addressed, and that consolidation of middle schools is a compromise that definitely needs to happen. So maybe we're going to close all of these down to we're not going to close any of these is a drastic thing, and maybe there'll be some shift in that once they realize the realities of what you just described. I think that there probably needs to be some compromise measures where they close some of them, but not as many as they were proposing in the beginning. And then there's this opportunity to have a conversation around this, because as a council member, I was constantly reminding folks in neighborhoods to support their schools, even if they didn't have kids going to school at the time. Retired people who don't have kids yet, supporting schools. And I've seen that improve in Fort Worth ISD in the neighborhood that I live in. And being totally transparent, I sent my kids to private school from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I find myself in a little bit of a quandary about even discussing these things, knowing so many people who know more about the topic, which is why I suggested to EJ that we have a few of those people come on a future pod so that we can get some insight from experts. What I truly believe is that experts should be making these decisions. And so that point you made about how passionate parents showing up and swaying a school board and people making political decisions based on concerns that they're not going to be reelected in a future election irks me like nobody's business, because I don't think that's what public service is about.
Well, then you also look at that they are spending $2 million on some type of consultant to help with this decision.
Which, did they do that to begin with? Is that how they came up with the plan to consolidate?
That part came out of nowhere in the story. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what the strategy was, but in the story, it came out of nowhere.
Because I think that one would hope that they got input from experts before they even came forward with this plan, as poorly as it was rolled out and explained to the community, because the community really felt like was presented with a foregone conclusion of, we've already landed on this as being the decision, and therefore putting the community in a position of feeling like if they disagreed that they just had to come in there and fight for the complete opposite instead of having a conversation. So what I've shared with the folks who I've talked to who were very happy with the reconsideration and not closing all these schools is that this is not the end. You should not just be like, okay, we got them to not do that decision that we thought was bad, therefore we don't have to do anything else. It is a perfect opportunity to address the things that brought us to the place we were, that they said they needed to do this major consolidation, figure out how to fix those issues, and if there is a compromise middle ground of closing some but not all, how to support those schools that remain and stay open and move forward, and set not such a defensive position of, we just have to understand that enrollment is going to continue to decline and everything is going to continue to get worse. And
I do agree there that we have not, our current leadership isn't in the focus of how do we make Fort Worth ISD a place people want to send their kids. It's all about, well, this is what the data says. And I do believe that's the issue that you have when people who are making the decisions are actually not a part of the community, don't have kids there. They're just doing their job. And when it's just their job, you can just say, well, the data shows I'm not going to fight to make this place better. I do believe that if whatever the tenure of our current superintendent, if there's ever, whoever the next one is, it's someone who believes in Fort Worth ISD, maybe has the youthful energy to keep the city believing in the group, has maybe kids who are also going to the schools, because that just creates a different pride for being at Fort Worth ISD. I don't know. To me, the whole when you look at the 6A Texas schools, all of these schools are in nice areas: Woodlands, Allen, Plano,
I think that's part of it.
Keller.
Is the
wealth. But that's the kicker, though. It's like we have to compete with these big schools, with these rich communities, that's always been Fort Worth's issue, and why I always felt like Fort Worth is not an innovative place is because we're obsessed with keeping roots. We're proud of 1973 Blue Jackets, man, we were them, and we're more about holding on culture. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There's just consequences to every decision. And that's all I'm saying is that my responsibility is to just be aware that there's consequences on holding on to different things. Most places that hold on to culture then sacrifice a lot of innovative things that come their way, or changing and adapting to where the world is going. And so all I'm saying is that's what I think Fort Worth gets stuck into. Is we think that these 7-year-old kids care that their grandpa went here in 68, and that this matters to the 7-year-old, when really what matters to the 7-year-old is Can they be pride? Like, look at, like, I think a great example of this is the Dallas Cowboys, right? People love the Dallas Cowboys. You know who doesn't like the Dallas Cowboys? 10-year-olds. Because Dallas Cowboys haven't won in their lifetime. They like Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs and Eagles jerseys. You got kids wearing Eagles jerseys in Dallas, Texas. But yeah, their grandpa, Dallas Cowboy, 94, Troy Aikman. We sound the same way about our schools. We sound the same way about our stuff. Is that we're proud of something that today in your kids' lives is not winning. And so eventually, we have to figure out how to create winning schools where we're proud to bring kids who are currently in families or moving to the suburbs so that we can be proud of the talent. We have Eastern Hills, great at basketball. If they had a couple more guys, they could maybe play at the 4A, 5A level and play against those other schools. So we have a lot of talented kids. You just ask that one principal to run an entire high school. You ask that one good quarterback kid to get sacked 20 times and lose by 21 points because he has no other players good on his team. If we brought these people together, you could create that fabric, and I think that's a big missing part of all of this.
And I am wading into a territory that I am not educated enough to have a super informed opinion on.
What we'll have is, though, Ann, is I'm definitely excited to get some educators on here who actually, like you said, knows about this. But let's talk about who does have a plan, and that is Governor Abbott and his obsession with school vouchers. What we're seeing is that this plan of funding public schools, and let's be clear, we are right. We're in this situation because of lack of state funding. We have a state leader who's trying to kill public schools, then actually make them better. So if all that was there, yes, we could have we could not be feeling threatened about the funding of our small middle schools. But that's the case we're in. In this Texas Tribune article, a wave of Republican incumbents were swept out of Texas House in Tuesday's primary runoff, including a handful who opposed school vouchers last fall, handing Governor Abbott a tentative majority in the lower chamber on his signature issue. With most ballots counted across the state, 6 of the 8 GOP House members were forced into overtime appear to lose their runoffs, continuing a surge of anti-establishment energy that had already led to ousters of 9 House Republicans in the March primary. So it's something scary where, like, Abbott really only needed like 2 more votes to get these vouchers passed, and now he just won 6 to 8 different people who could win their seats. So the runoff brought mixed results for Texas hard right. The House gained a pro-voucher majority for now, and the 15 GOP incumbents ousted by insurgent challenges across both rounds of primary amounted to a record. House Speaker Dade Phelan, the top target of the party's rightmost faction, survived his runoff, but many people under him dealt with major turbulence, and now there's true ability for Abbott to get what he wants across the aisle. The 4 incumbents from the North Texas area that we're looking at is House District 33, House District 61, House District 64, and House District 91, and then House District 97, which is Fort Worth, in a race where he didn't win that one because, well, I guess Abbott did endorse McQueenie, which is interesting. You know, we all saw Bean as the bad person because of Patrick and Paxman's endorsement, but Abbott endorsed
Yeah,
McQueenie.
it was split on that, which I think confused a lot of people because I know people were looking at who endorsed in those races to kind of determine what to do, and that one was a split one.
And that's the part too, is like Craig Goldman has votes when he was at the state level of vouchers and not being someone against Greg Abbott. So we're all here fighting about bigger or smaller middle schools. And do I think Governor Abbott says that his next public education raise for teachers, more funding will come? But when you look at how much he wants to give to the private schools, it's important to see that funding will impact on the back end. Because if 2 kids from a 20 class public school leaves to go to a public school, that's $12,000 that was there to fund that public school going to the private school. And
Not to mention, he says that another top legislative priority will be additional reductions in property tax. Abbott wants to remove property taxes as a funding source for the maintenance and operation budget for public schools, with that lost revenue to be made up elsewhere. I'm not sure where elsewhere is, because they've also passed laws to say that there will never be an income tax in the state of Texas. So this is all based, that's where they get their revenue, is on property tax.
Yep.
So how are we going to fund these schools?
Yep. So teachers still have to teach if there's smaller amounts of kids. Their salary stays the same. You know, lights, heat still have to work. They stay the same. And so that's why, I'm always at the end of the day, no matter where we land on schools and how we should run them, the way we should frame everything is public school is a thing that makes us a we instead of me nation. It is the core anchor to what brings us all together. And I think like that's why I believe everyone should send their kids to public schools. That's why I think we should all invest in public schools, be there for our public schools, because it truly is the fabric of how we learn how to interact with people who don't look like us, how to support people from different economic classes. I love telling the story of I went to one small town, Texas, where we had one school, and I went to school with the richest kid and the poorest kid. And I remember going to the rich kid's house, and we had a salad for dinner. And I was blown away because I never had a salad. And I'm like, I can't believe this is how they eat. And then he came to my house with my mom, 4'8" Puerto Rican woman playing salsa. He walks in the house, he gives her a hug and a kiss and says, welcome, our house is your home. And he talked about how, man, my mom hasn't given me a hug or a kiss in a very long time. So the different social connectedness that happens when you bring kids together from all walks of life, you learn the treasures in each household. And that is, at the end of the day, what we should be focused on. And our current governor is not about we instead of me. And I believe a lot of us who are fighting for this Fort Worth politics stuff around schools, we need to make sure, are we doing this for we or is this for me? And at the end of the day, I think we'll get there. And it's pods like this that is making this dialogue in the front and center.
Yeah. I mean, to your point about we instead of me, this article ends with, I think it'll make him even more of a national figure, which to me signals that he's not really thinking about what's in the best interest of Texas if he's working to make himself a more national figure.
Yeah. There's no way. I just don't know how Governor Abbott can be liked nationally. I feel like he's like, if I don't get liked nationally, I'm going to make Texas its own place.
There's some people that got elected in this election, or at least are going to be on the ballot in November, who
people make fun of me, but
they're for that.
People make fun of me, but someone asked me, what is my craziest bet? And I said, my craziest bet that Texas secedes from the Union in my lifetime. That's my crazy bet. Like, I'm not saying, it could be like the Capitol 6 riot where it was like fakes and a hoax and it was just all vanity and it happens for 36 hours. And, you know, it goes down in the history books that Texas left the Union for 3 days and then came back. But I do think it's going to happen. I mean, like, look at it. Why would you have such a big surplus? For what? What else are you trying to do? He wants to turn counties into electoral college where each county's votes are equal and it's not about people's votes. I mean, why would you do that? We already are our own electric grid system. Also, to create a lot of power because the rest of America needs to go through Texas to move anything. I don't know. I just think that if he's going to get angry enough where he can't go national, that he's like, fine, well, I'm taking over Texas. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But that's my crazy bet.
You said it on the pod, so we'll have documentation.
Yes, let's go ahead and move into wins and losses, even though we just talked about a lot of losses.
Yeah, and I think my problem is that I was trying to find a loss that wasn't covered in a story, but I kind of did talk a little bit about my loss in one of the stories. But that is basically state elected officials trying to control local elections. With this last runoff, we had our governor, our lieutenant governor, and our attorney general all endorsing folks that they felt would come and help carry water for the things that they're trying to get done at the state level, and in retaliation against people who didn't carry the water for the things that they were trying to get done in past legislative sessions. And I just think that is really kind of an arrogant position to take. The people are elected in these local elections to go to the state and represent the people in the districts from which they come. And they should be elected by us. And if you have an opinion but the efforts, and when I was in office, I never endorsed anyone. I knew that the people who were going to be elected in those districts to be on the city council to work alongside me were going to be sent there by the people in that district. And I was going to have to work with whoever came and sat on the dais next to me. And it was my job to work with them, influence them, encourage them, inform them, persuade them of the opinions that I thought were for the we instead of the me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a hard job to do. But if you can just rig it all and get people that totally agree with you to all just come down there and then refuse to allow people to even chair committees that don't agree with you, then I think you just get less people talking about important decisions and fewer voices heard, and you just block out half the population.
Yep, I agree. That is that's how other countries do it, and those are ones we don't want to be like. So my loss kind of goes with what you're saying as well, and that is the ruling stands firm on abortion. Justices strike exemption for women with medical complicated pregnancies. The Texas Supreme Court ruled against more than 20 Texas women who sued the state over abortions. They said were delayed or denied during medical emergencies because of the state's bans on the procedures. The justices unanimously struck down a lower court's decision that would have exempted any Texan with a complicated pregnancy from the bans. Texas law already permits a life-saving abortion when a woman is at risk of death or significant physical harm. The state high court said, and the trial court injunction departed from the law as written without constitutional justification. A physician who tells a patient your life is threatened by a complication that has arisen during your pregnancy and you may die or there is a serious risk you will suffer substantial physical impairment unless an abortion is permitted. And as the same breath states, the state says, but the law won't allow me to provide an abortion in these circumstances is simply wrong in the legal assessment. The state is basically blaming saying you shouldn't be suing the state, you should be suing the physicians. And the physicians are getting bullied by Ken Paxton saying, if you do anything, I'm coming after you. And so they're scared to do what's right.
He wrote letters coming after them. He wrote letters to doctors telling them.
So now that state is telling these 20 women that, hey, you're suing the wrong people. You should be suing the physician who didn't do it. But the physician is getting bullied. And I love what you said. That's classic gaslighting right there. And so my loss is that the state is gaslighting a bunch of women who already had complications with abortions or having children. And it just shows how, again, the scary control and manipulation at the state level continues to be in our schools and also in our families.
So my win is that the Historic Northside Main Street Initiative has hired a new director, and that director is D. Laura O'Neill. And I was able to attend a meeting that was held at the Rosemarine Theater on Saturday, kind of introducing to the community about zoning. And so they have surveys on the street and surveys coming out of that meeting to inform people and educate people about the programs that they're having. And I think that DeLaura is going to be an amazing addition to that team, working alongside the Hispanic Chamber and doing this community outreach to ensure that the improvements that come to the North Main corridor are for the people and by the people, as development increases in both the future of Panther Island and the current stockyards that is about to enter into its second phase of redevelopment. So I think that team is strong, and that meeting yesterday, while it was about boring zoning, was really informative, and I think there were people there that were very interested in learning more and being a part of the process.
D. Laura O'Neill has also been on the pod, is a fan of the pod, someone we see as very intelligent and thoughtful, and so just glad to see her continue to be a part of the city. My win is kind of wrapping this around. Hey, there's a lot of, even though we shine light on a lot of negative stuff for an hour with you guys, there's also what makes me have hope is just the people who are doing the right work, and some of those are our kids. And so my neighbor, she graduated from UTA with an electrical engineering degree. And I just wanted to acknowledge that because she lives on the east side of Fort Worth. She went to Eastern Hills, which if you look at the real estate's rating of that school, they would give it a 1 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10. And so none of us will move over there or send our kids there because the real estate people told us it's a bad place. But she graduated salutatorian from Eastern Hills 4 years ago during the pandemic. She is a DACA student. She is Spanish speaking. First, her lovely family who I get to connect with, and I get to connect with her kids because they know English. But she then goes to UTA, gets a electrical engineering degree. All right, at UTA. FAFSA, not possible for her. All these things, and you know who needs an electrical engineer who speaks Spanish? BNSF. You know who needs these things? All these companies we care about. And Fort Worth has kids like that who are doing things. And so to me, it shows that Fort Worth ISD has a lot of treasure that we also got to celebrate and let people know that's happening.
Great win.
So, all right, beautiful people, we will see you next week. And we're going to try to find experts and passionate people about this education thing so that we can have a high quality conversation about it. And yeah, you guys have been great. Continue to be great. Enjoy your summers. As I know it hasn't felt like summer, but enjoy it. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week.